I'm 89 years old. If you're afraid to live alone, don't go to a nursing home. Do this instead. Let me tell you something people don't usually say out loud. When people hear that I live alone at my age, they assume I must be afraid. Afraid of falling, afraid of getting sick, afraid of dying with no one around. But that was never the fear that kept me up at night. The real fear, the one that sat quietly in my chest, was something else entirely. I wasn't afraid of being alone when my time came. I was afraid of what might happen to me while I was still here, still thinking, still feeling, still myself. There's a difference, and it's an important one. Because once you understand that, everything else starts to look different. My name doesn't matter much, but I'll give it to you anyway. I'm a woman who has lived a long life. I've been a wife, a mother, a widow. I've buried people I thought I couldn't live without, and somehow I kept living anyway. For the past several years, I've lived alone in a house that is too big for me now, too quiet most days, but still mine in every way that counts. Every chair, every cup, every creak in the floorboards carries a memory. And I'll tell you this honestly, that matters more than most people realize. Now, my children, they worry. Of course they do. That's what children do when their parents get old. They start watching you the way you once watched them when they were small, looking for signs of trouble, signs that something might go wrong. Their love becomes cautious, protective, sometimes a little suffocating, even when it's coming from the best place in the world. And one day, not too long ago, my daughter called me and said we needed to talk. And I knew exactly what that meant before she even said it. She came over that weekend, and she didn't come alone. She brought her husband, which told me this wasn't just a passing thought. They sat at my kitchen table, drinking coffee, and she started talking about options. Now, I've lived long enough to know that when someone says the word options in that tone, it doesn't really mean you have choices. It means decisions have already been made somewhere else, and now they're being presented to you gently, wrapped in concern. She gave me 3 paths. I could move in with them. I could stay in my house, but have a caregiver come in. Or we could start looking at what she called communities, places where I would be safe, surrounded by people my age, with staff to take care of things. She spoke carefully, kindly. I could see the fear in her eyes. Not fear of me, but fear for me. And that made it harder to push back, because when someone is afraid for you, you don't want to dismiss that. You don't want to make them feel like their love is misplaced. So I told her I would think about it. And I did. I thought about it longer than she expected, I think. Because when you reach my age, you don't rush decisions like that. You've already learned what it costs to get them wrong. Eventually, I agreed to try living with her for a while, just to see how it felt. And I want to be fair when I tell you about that time, because it wasn't terrible. Her home is warm. Her children are lively and full of joy. There were moments, beautiful ones, when my great-grandchild would climb into my lap without asking, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And I realized how much I had missed that simple closeness, the weight of a small body trusting you completely. But even in a good house, with good people, something began to shift. Not immediately. It was subtle at first. The way dinner happened at a time that wasn't mine. The way mornings started earlier or later than my body was used to. The way I found myself waiting, adjusting, fitting into rhythms that had nothing to do with me. No one told me to do that. No one asked me to give anything up. But it happened anyway. Because the truth is, when you move into someone else's life at my age, you don't become part of it in the way you imagine. You become a careful addition, a respected guest. And being a guest sounds pleasant, but it comes with a quiet cost. You stop making decisions the way you used to. You start considering whether you're in the way. You begin to notice the small pauses in conversations, the adjustments people make around you. No one complains, not out loud, but you feel it. I remember one morning, standing in the hallway, hearing voices from the kitchen. Not a full conversation, just fragments. Something about schedules, about the bathroom, about timing. And I stood there thinking, I have become something that needs to be worked around. A problem to solve, even if no one would ever call me that. And it wasn't anger I felt. It was something quieter. A kind of realization settling into place. I stayed for several weeks, long enough to know it wasn't where I belonged. So I told my daughter I wanted to try the second option, having someone come in to help. The woman who arrived was efficient, capable, and professional. She knew exactly what she was doing. She cleaned, she organized, she made sure everything was in order. On paper, it was exactly what I needed, but living with it felt different. There's something people don't talk about when it comes to having a caregiver in your home. It's not just about help. It's about presence. A constant presence in spaces that used to be yours alone. My kitchen, for example, that room held decades of my life. It was where I raised my children, where I stood at the sink after losing people I loved, where I shared quiet moments that never made it into stories, but mattered just the same. And now there was someone else there, moving through it, rearranging it, using it in ways that made sense to her, but not to me. She called me by a formal name, one I hadn't heard in years, and it felt like I had been moved out of my own identity and into someone else's version of me. I became a role instead of a person. And I know she meant well. I truly do. But meaning well doesn't always make something right. Then there was the matter of money. Help like that isn't small, and it isn't temporary. I sat down one evening and looked at the numbers carefully, the way I used to when my husband and I were raising children and stretching every dollar we had. And I realized something simple and undeniable. This wasn't sustainable. Not without leaning heavily on my daughter, not without becoming exactly what I had spent my entire life trying not to be. A burden. That word carries weight, especially when you've spent decades standing on your own feet. So I made another decision. I let the caregiver go. And that left the third option, the one my daughter had mentioned most gently. The communities. The places where everything is arranged for you, where safety is guaranteed, where you are never alone unless you choose to be. I agreed to visit one. I wanted to be fair. I wanted to see it for myself, not just reject it out of stubbornness. It was clean, bright, organized. The people working there were kind, attentive. They showed me a room, a small one, with a window overlooking a courtyard. They showed me a schedule, neatly written out, detailing the day. Morning stretches, lunch, activities, social time. Everything planned. Everything accounted for. And as I stood there, listening, smiling politely, something inside me became very clear. I had spent nearly 9 decades making my own decisions. Deciding when to wake up, when to eat, what to do with my afternoons, how to spend my quiet moments. Those choices, small as they might seem to someone else, were not small to me. They were the structure of my life. And here, without anyone saying it directly, I could feel that structure being replaced. Not taken violently, not forced, but gently, efficiently, with good intentions. And that somehow made it harder to accept. On the drive home, I looked out the window and thought to myself, not yet. Maybe one day, but not now. Because as long as I could still choose how to live my day, I wasn't ready to hand that over to anyone, no matter how kind they were. So there I was again, back in my house. No plan, no system, no solution that anyone would recognize as practical. Just me, my quiet rooms, and the same question that had started all of this, still unanswered in the eyes of everyone except me. And what happened next wasn't something I planned at all. It didn't come from a decision or a strategy. It started with something so small, most people would overlook it. A simple moment outside by the mailbox on an ordinary day that didn't feel important at the time. But looking back now, I can tell you that was the moment everything began to change. It was one of those ordinary afternoons where nothing seems like it's going to matter. I had gone outside to get the mail, moving slowly like I do now, taking my time because time is one thing I no longer rush. And standing there, just a few steps away, was a young woman I had seen once or twice, but never really met. She was struggling with a stroller, a paper bag of groceries, and a toddler who had decided, very firmly, that he was not going to move another inch. Now, I've lived long enough to recognize that look on someone's face. The look of someone holding too many things together with not enough hands. I knew it immediately, the way you recognize a language you used to speak fluently. So I did the simplest thing I could think of. I said, "Can I hold something?" She looked at me like she had forgotten other people existed for a moment, and then she said yes. I held the bag. She gathered the child, managed the stroller, and within a few minutes, everything was under control again. It wasn't anything remarkable. No grand gesture, just a small moment of help. But sometimes that's all it takes. Her name was Layla. She had just moved in next door not long before that, with two children. The little one I had just met, full of opinions and energy, and an older daughter who I would soon come to know just as well. Layla was on her own, trying to build something in a new place after life had rearranged itself in ways she hadn't planned for. And I understood that maybe more than she realized. We didn't become anything official. There was no conversation where we decided to help each other. It just unfolded, naturally, quietly, without anyone naming it. A few days later, she knocked on my door in the morning. The toddler had a fever and she needed to take her daughter to school. Could I watch him for an hour? Of course I could. That hour turned into two. Two turned into a morning here and there. And before long, there was a rhythm between us that didn't feel forced or structured. It felt human. The little boy, Marcus, was not what you would call an easy child. He had strong opinions about everything, from what he wanted to eat to what he believed belonged in which place. Some of those opinions were creative, let's say, but he was curious, alive in a way that filled the room. He would stand in my kitchen and stare at the glass cabinet like it held the secrets of the universe, breathing on it just to watch the fog appear and disappear. I hadn't seen wonder like that up close in years. I hadn't realized how much I missed it. And then there was Priya, his sister. She was at that beautiful age where children start asking real questions, but haven't yet learned to hide them. She would come by after school sometimes, sit at my table while I made my late dinner, and talk. She asked me why my hands shook. She asked me if I remembered the war. She once asked me if people in the past saw in black and white, because she had seen old photographs and drawn her own conclusions. I told her no, we saw color, just like she did, and she looked at me like I had just corrected something important about the world. She also asked me if I was afraid of dying, and I told her the truth in a way she could understand. I said sometimes a little, but mostly I'm just very tired by 9 o'clock. And she laughed so hard she nearly fell off the chair. That kind of laughter. I hadn't heard it directed at me in a long time. Layla, in her own way, started helping me too. Not in the structured, professional way the caregiver had. Not with a schedule or a list. She just noticed things. If my groceries were too heavy, she carried them. If something needed fixing, she handled it without making a big deal out of it. She showed up the same way I did for her without turning it into something formal. We talked. Really talked. Not the polite conversations people have when they don't want to say too much, but the kind where you sit at a table and let things come out as they are. She told me about her worries, about money, about whether she was doing enough for her children. And I told her about my life, not the cleaned up version people present at the end, but the real one. The complicated parts, the love that wasn't always perfect, the grief that never fully leaves you. And something happened in those conversations, something I hadn't expected. I started to feel like myself again. Not younger, not different, just myself. The version of me that existed before I became something people worried about, something people tried to solve. My daughter came to visit a few months later, and she saw it before I did. She looked at me and said, "You seem like yourself again." And I realized she was right. Somewhere along the way, in helping and being helped, in listening and being listened to, I had found my way back to that place. Now, I want to be very clear about something. This is not a perfect solution. There are still hard days. There are mornings when my body reminds me exactly how old I am. There was a day not long ago when I fell in the hallway and lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, thinking this is exactly what everyone was afraid of. And then I realized I wasn't hurt. I took my time, got up, and carried on. Life doesn't become easy just because you choose a different path, but it becomes yours. And that's the point I want to leave you with. People will offer you solutions when you get older. Good ones, well-meaning ones. They'll talk about safety, convenience, structure. And those things matter. I won't pretend they don't. But there is something else that matters just as much, if not more. The ability to decide. The ability to be part of something, not as a responsibility, not as a task, but as a person who still has something to give. What I found wasn't a system. It wasn't a plan anyone could package and sell. It was something older than that, something simpler. I found connection, the kind that happens when people need each other and don't overcomplicate it. The kind that begins with holding a paper bag for a stranger and grows into something that makes both lives a little lighter. So if you're afraid to live alone, I understand that fear. I really do. But before you give up your space, your rhythm, your right to choose how you live your day, try something else first. Knock on a door. Say yes when someone needs help. Let yourself need help in return. You might find that what you're looking for isn't a place where everything is taken care of for you, but a place where you are still part of the world, still connected to it in a real and meaningful way. I'm 89 years old. I still live in my house. I still eat dinner when I feel like it. I still sit in my chair by the window and watch the light change in the afternoon. And now, sometimes, I hear footsteps on the porch, a knock on the door, a child's voice calling my name. And I've come to understand something very simple, very quietly. That is enough. It is, finally, exactly enough. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you again soon.